Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With fishingbooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. Fishingbooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to fishingbooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
Study
and play come together on a Windows 11 PC.
And for a limited time, college students get
the best of both worlds.
Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Think about the last time you cooked wild game. Maybe it was venison, maybe it was duck, or something you pulled out of the freezer after a long season. What did you make? Chances are you went in a pretty familiar direction. Maybe it was a steak, maybe it was a roast that you braised, maybe you made a pan sauce with wine, something with berries, something vaguely European. And look, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Those traditions exist for a reason. They work, and they've been refined over generations. But it does raise a question. What is the default? Because when you zoom out a little bit, there are a lot of cuisines around the world that might actually be just as good, if not better, at handling the kinds of challenges that come with wild food. So today, that's what we're digging into.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
I'm Justin Townsend, and as always, I'm joined by Adam Berkelmans.
Hello, everybody.
Today's episode is one that I think a lot of people are going to recognize themselves in. Because if you hunt, fish, or spend any time cooking wild food, there's a pretty good chance that you fall into a familiar pattern. You get a piece of venison, or duck, or fish, and you default to a pretty narrow set of approaches. European-style dishes, Midwest comfort food, maybe some barbecue. And again, those are great. They work, but there's a reason they've stuck around. But what we're going to explore today is the idea that those approaches are just one slice of a much bigger picture. We're going to look at how a lot of global cuisines, places like China, Mexico, India, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, were actually built around conditions that look a lot more like wild food than modern Western cooking does. Think about the tougher animals, leaner meat, big, bold flavors, and more variability. And because of that, we've developed techniques and systems that can be incredibly useful when you're working with wild game. So we'll get into a bit of history, thinking about why European traditions become the default for our wild cooking here. And then we'll break down why these other cuisines work so well, not just culturally, but functionally. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how you can actually use some of those ideas at home. First, though, it's been a while since you've gotten an update from either of us, so here we go. If you're in the greater Minneapolis area, you'll probably see us in the next couple weeks bouncing around there. We got invited up to the Professional Outdoor Media Association to cook a wild game dinner there. So Adam and I will both be doing that, along with Ricky and John Wallace. You see him as the wild game cook on the socials. So we're going to be cooking together a delicious feast. We're also exploring some events with BHA and some other stuff while we're there, just to kind of hang out with everybody. Outside of that, it's still warm here in Hawaii. The beaches are still white. We survived the floods and the waters of the winter, and now things are easing up. Refreshing the garden, getting back out shooting my bow. Mouflung sheep season's just around the corner, and exciting times. Adam, what do you got, buddy?
Well, other than our upcoming trip, I've recently relocated myself all the way across Canada from Ottawa to Calgary. So I'm a Westerner now, for the time being anyways. It'll just be for the summer.
You got your cowboy boots and your cowboy hat.
Oh, yeah. I'm just going to be a whole different person out here. Yeah, so it's pretty exciting. Things are greening up here right away, so I'm looking forward to getting into some foraging. I don't think I'll be doing much hunting over the summer here. There's not much hunting to be had in the summer. Kind of missed out on Ontario's wild turkey season and stuff, but that's okay for this cool adventure. So I think, I'd really like to get into some Western foraging and get lots of camping in the mountains and stuff. So I'm pretty excited to see what Alberta has to offer. I lived out here like 16 or 17 years ago, so it's been a while, and everything I remember about it kind of points me to looking forward to what it has to offer. So yeah, can't wait.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to get into this time of year. It's good to know that fall's just around the corner, so hunting seasons are there, but the summer is going to be enjoyable. Mm-hmm. What about a little history on how these European traditions became the default for wild food?
Yeah, so getting back into our theme here, when most people in North America think about cooking wild game, they're usually pulling from a pretty specific set of traditions, and that's generally leaning towards like French, German, Austrian, British, Italian sometimes. And you can really see it in the dishes that we kind of see moving around online, like the stews and the long braises, wine-based sauces, fruit pairings, like Wellingtons, really heavy meat-forward plates where the meat is the center of the plate, whether that's a steak or a roast or whatever else. Those aren't really random choices that we're all falling into. They come from a very specific condition in Europe and very specific people. I think a lot of what we think of as classic wild game cooking, especially like the French stuff, and a lot of the British stuff too actually, comes out of aristocratic hunting culture that existed before and we don't really see anymore today. Hunting in that context wasn't just about food, it was barely about the food. It was more about status and land ownership, controlled hunts, gamekeepers, full estates. The people cooking that food were often working with animals that were older, tougher, sometimes hung for extended periods to develop flavor, much longer than we tend to hang things for. So they built techniques to manage that. The long braises to break down connective tissues, wine and alcohol, not just for flavor, but also because it was readily available and culturally central to Europeans. I remember in a lot of these traditions, animals, and particularly birds, were left hanging and maturing for much longer than they were used to today, often until, like I said, hanging pheasants and ducks till the heads just fall off. And that's not something that we are used to today. So, you need a lot of heavy sauces to control and balance those stronger flavors in the meat that you get from that all that kind of heavy funkiness. Fruit, berries, apples, things like that, used for acidity and sweetness to counter that richness and intensity as well. And that's where you get a lot of those classic pairings from. So like venison with berry sauce isn't just a tradition for the sake of the tradition. It's actually like kind of a functional solution that got repeated enough to become the general rule. And at the same time, that's only kind of half the picture. The other half is much more practical. So in subsistence cooking, rural cooking, people who are hunting or raising animals to feed themselves, not necessarily to entertain guests or to show status. And that's where you see things like stews, pottages, stretching meat with grains or vegetables, using every single part of the animal and leaning on preservation, like salt, smoke, fermentation, where it existed locally. And alcohol, again, as a flavor and also as a preservation technique. Those techniques are a little closer to what we have to deal with today when we're cooking wild game. But both of those streams, the aristocratic one and the practical one, came across North America through migration from Europe. You had people coming over who were used to eating a certain way, and even if their circumstances changed, their cooking didn't immediately change with it. So they brought with them recipes, they brought habits, they brought expectations in particular. So even if someone was now hunting deer in the woods for sustenance, rather than participating in like a managed hunt on an estate, they were still applying those same frameworks. So braising, saucing, pairing it with something sweet or acidic. That was what they knew and what they were used to. And that got reinforced over time in North America as well, just like it did in Europe. So you can really see this in early cookbooks. Like I'm sure most of us have, those kind of early hunting and fishing cookbooks and they're just full of those kind of European recipes. You see in hunting literature, you see it pass through community knowledge, and it's all kind of builds on the same traditions that came over from Europe. So it really became the default, not because it's the only way to do it, but because it's the most familiar and the most well documented, in English. And if you move away from that, you usually don't go all that far. You kind of end up into, Midwestern cooking, which is still heavily influenced by those same European roots, or maybe into barbecue, which solves some of those same problems, but in a slightly different way. But it still kind of sits in a pretty narrow lane. Lots of European influence there as well. So what we end up with is this idea that wild game has, a right, in quotes, way to be cooked and a wrong way to be cooked. The right way being long, slow, sauced, often heavy, a lot of focus on big steaks or a central piece of meat or whole animal like a whole duck or turkey. And again, this all works. These techniques exist for a reason. We're not casting shade on any of this stuff at all. But they're not the only way that these problems have been solved around the world. They're just ones that got carried here, written down, and repeated often enough that they became the standard. But the reality is that those European traditions weren't the only ones dealing with tough, lean, unpredictable meat or muddy river fish or bitter wild vegetables. They were just one version of it.
To reinforce kind of what you said, we're not saying that any of these methods are wrong. There's definitely an appetite to explore beyond what we look at as traditional, because what really is traditional really isn't traditional. It's just an adaptation of something else from somewhere else in whatever pattern you've got, right? I think we see influences from all over the world being used in wild game. I think most notably, like Adam mentioned, the prevalence of a lot of European dishes being kind of the mainframe. Like if I go here to Google, and this is granted my Google, which is stained with my own personal searches, and I type in wild game recipes and I hit enter. Let's see what's the first one to come up. It just gets a lot of websites for wild game. Let's see, then let's look up venison recipes. All right, first one up, first three right out of the book or out of the gate. Venison steak with caramelized onions and I can't see the rest of it. St. Shaw's recipe. The title is How to Cook Venison Steak. All right, pretty straightforward. The next one, venison bourguignon, Miss Allie's Kitchen.
French.
Yep. The next one, venison parmesan by Stacy Lynn Harris.
Italian. Or Italian-American anyways.
We've got best venison stew recipe. These are healthy seasonal recipes. That's the website. The next one, tender and crisp venison carnitas by Jess Prowse. Venison stew. Looks like with peas and carrots. So very, very English. And then we've got hearty venison stew from Modern Farmer Eats. And then we've got venison steak with oregano. The Home Intent. And then we've got another steak recipe. And then venison stir fry. Cooking with Carly. But it appears to be broccoli, bell peppers, and some meat. And then Simply Recipes, the next one, venison sauerbraten. So
German.
Yeah, of 12 recipes, largely European influence, minus I would say 2, which we get the carnitas and the stir fry, which stir fries, that particular stir fry definitely looks to be a very
more American
stir fry. And I would probably imagine the carnitas are something similar.
Yeah. But it goes to show that in general, people are kind of still sitting within that European American kind of section of cooking.
It's interesting when you think about it, and I've been doing a lot of soul searching and actually queued up a bit more writing and recipes over in my plan for the remainder of the year, and part of that is kind of pushing the limits on some of the recipes and food, and I want to cook things that are kind of outside the normal scope of what we see. We obviously don't need another venison steak recipe. We obviously don't need another stew recipe with carrots and peas. There's lots of good recipes out there for those things, and you can go find them. But really beyond that, I think there's a lot of exploration that's being left on the table. And even what I see in cookbooks these days is a person is cooking an adaptation of the same dish.
Yeah. Yeah, you just see these same dishes kind of rehashed over and over and over and over again with slight differences, maybe. Sometimes they're exactly the same. I start to get fatigued after... I used to buy every wild game cookbook I could find, and I've stopped recently because I find there so many of them are just full of the same recipe over and over again.
Yeah.
There's only so many venison Wellingtons I need to see before I get it. Like, they're good, but I don't need 50 recipes for venison Wellington.
Yeah, or like one that subs out a different... It's like one element changes.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think we've joked about this, with folks before of it being like, oh yeah, you see like, and this is no different in the restaurant world, like a chef comes up in a kitchen and then goes to work in his own kitchen, and then like his recipes are slightly different than the recipes from the restaurant he came from, but it's enough as like its own personal spin, or he pulls techniques from 4 different restaurants. So like that's very apparent in like the wild game sense too. I think, in the virtual world we live in, we all don't cook side by side frequently, but there's an influence that plays there. Like you can see a school of thought that emerges, people gravitate towards each other, and there's a lot of that. I don't know, you mentioned Wellington. We talked about stews and stir fries and steaks, and I don't know how many Mississippi pot roast recipes are floating around the internet. Like all these other things, like those are there. But what is the shift we need? And I think if you look at a lot of regional cuisines around the world, especially ones that are developed under tighter constraints, more scarcity, you'll start to see something a little interesting. In those conditions, they were actually looking at something very closer to wild food than modern Western cooking does. And that's like, there's a key shift here. A lot of these cuisines weren't built around tender, well-marbled, uniform cuts of meat. And this is kind of like opposing, because we talk about kind of the aristocratic cooking, and that comes really from a place of abundance, right? People could pick and choose what cuts they want. They had full staffs and kitchens to prepare the meals. Things were shot in the field by a game manager and then brought into the kitchens. But this other side of the food story, it was built around tough animals, leaner proteins, stronger off flavors from maybe, warmer temps, or things being left out a little too long, or just taking time to get to the places. There were limited resources, and there was like a need to make everything work. And I think this comes from a different place. So instead of adapting those cuisines to wild food, you start to realize like you don't have to really adapt, because they were already built for them. And when you look at cuisines in places like India and the Caribbean and Mexican, Northern American cuisine, American Indian cuisine, you can go down the list, Southeast Asian, African, all of these are really, really good at building flavor. They use spice, acid, fat, all kind of working together to create this really beautiful dish. And what it does is it solves a lot of common complaints people have about wild game, right? Oh, it's too lean. We use that bad word, gamey. Oh, it's, bitter in the grains, or the fish is too fishy. A lot of things, those ingredients and those characteristics don't disappear, but they get balanced.
Yeah, that's something people can actually apply pretty quickly too. You don't need to master the cuisine. Like, you don't need to become well-versed in South Asian cooking, Thai cooking, or anything. You just kind of need to understand what they're doing. And that really helps. You don't have to master 30 cuisines around the world, because that's pretty much impossible for any human being unless you're 500 years old. But you can understand what they're doing and the elements of that cuisine and apply it yourself at home. If you're looking at cuisines like Chinese or Vietnamese, the focus there is less on masking flavors and more on managing textures. So we're talking about like thin slicing, quick cooking, breaking down meat into small pieces. You rarely see like a whole steak served in Chinese or Southeast Asian cuisine. All these techniques are basically designed to deal with tougher cuts. So instead of trying to turn a tough piece of meat into something that's not, they just work with it differently, and it works really well. On the other end, you have something like Japanese cuisine, or their goal isn't to cover anything up, it's kind of to highlight it. So they love highlighting kind of natural, delicious flavors, and they use broths, grilling, and very simple preparations often. And that works really well when you got really nice, good, clean, wild meat or fish. There's cuisines that deal with ingredients that Western cooking doesn't struggle with entirely. Could you break some of those down?
Yeah. I can. Let's transport ourselves to the Mekong Delta, Southeast Asia. Beautiful place, beautiful people, rivers, water, lots of abundance of plants. I don't know where I was going with that.
Just meandering like the Mekong.
Yeah, just wandering through the jungle. My mind slowly flowing into a river of thoughts. Anyway, they've got all kinds of techniques for handling, let's say, muddy fish. So think carp, catfish. A lot of people we look at, we're like, whatever, I don't know what to do with that. So it kind of get thrown in this trash fish category. There is a special place in my heart for catfish, and there will always be because I grew up eating it, and I love it so very much. But in this place, we find there's lots of strong aromatics. There's acid elements. Fermentation plays a big role. And I can tell you, after living in Hawaii for an extended period, fermentation plays a huge role here, because if you leave like a glass of water out for too long, it starts to ferment, and it's but it creates like this perfect atmosphere to do it. So if you kind of like lean into it, it really allows you to utilize it really, really well. So there's systems that have emerged in places like the Mekong or Hawaii or the subtropics, or like all these places that solve these problems. People traditionally lean into things. So just on the opposite side of the globe in Europe, where you see a lot of emergence of techniques and things like that, where people have leaned into the adaptation there. For instance, like hanging things. Like you can't hang an animal in a warm tropical climate the same manner you can in a drier, European climate. Like it's just not possible, or cooler European climate, whichever you want to choose. But we don't see this just with fish. Like a lot of these cuisines are built around the ingredients that from a Western perspective are seen as challenging or undesirable. Last night, Marjorie and I Marjorie's my wife, we broke down an entire 15-pound jackfruit in our kitchen. And it's like, we were talking like, we've never done this before. We'll like watch the YouTube video, figure out, cutting it open, pulling the seeds apart, and like that availability of ingredients, but also the approach that you see, like tougher, older animals, lean meat with very flat, little fat. Some of those off flavors we talk about, those off flavors come from, the world. The environment around them. Bitter greens, people have to eat what they have available. Organs, offcuts. Once again, I don't think, it's been an interesting coming here versus being in a lot of other parts of the West. Is like Asian cuisine is very dominant in Hawaii. The influence is very heavy. We talked about it in our American Foodscapes episode here, but like you can go anywhere and find organ meat. You can go find these great cuts. Like I was just in the grocery store and they have cups of blood, like for sale at the butcher section, which is great. So you get small bony fish, muddy tasting fish, fermented products with these crazy intense aromas, fish sauces and new vinegars and all these fruit fermented things. Like instead of trying to avoid those ingredients, grab them, turn them into something else, and lean into kind of a new exploration of cuisine. So let's think about fish for a minute. So if you got something muddy or strong, you don't just cook it. So I would say don't throw it in batter and fry it. Like fry it's not the save all for everything, but build a system around it, right? Use herbs, sugar, chilies, garlic, acid, fermentation. It will balance and reshape the flavor. The same thing with tougher meats. In a lot of Western cooking, the tough cuts means you're probably going to braise them for a long, long time. Well, in a lot of Asian or Caribbean, Latin cuisines, the same problem gets solved differently. You slice it thin, you cook it fast, you marinate it heavily, you break it down into smaller pieces so the texture stops being an issue. And then there are ingredients that Western cooking just sidelines completely. And we spent a lot of time talking about this, but organs. A lot of global cuisines, those organ meat, it's not secondary, they're central. Liver, heart, stomach, blood, like those are intentionally used in ways that highlight their strengths rather than trying to disguise them. The only time you ever really see blood in Western European culinary culture is in old, loose quote peasant cooking, and that's because it was just there. People were using what they had, which kind of reinforces our point. The same with bitter greens. A lot of Western cooking tries to reduce bitter to avoid it altogether, but in many other global cuisines, bitterness is just another flavor to balance. It's paired with salt and fat and acid and spice. And people actually look forward and celebrate the bitterness of their greens and their vegetables. Think bitter melon, a vegetable that would never do well in modern Western palates. As a matter of fact, I've seen people try it and turn their nose to it. And even things like fermentation. So strong fish sauces, shrimp paste, fermented beans. Those are all ways of building depth and managing ingredients that might otherwise feel one-dimensional or overwhelming. So what you end up with is a food system that are extremely good at handling variability. And they're not built around perfect ingredients or controlled ingredients. I think that's the thing here. This may make people a little uncomfortable because you got to kind of take this. You got to take the bumpers off like you're bowling, and you got to kind of like let loose and see where the ball goes. And that's where I think people will find a little more connection to your wild food, because wild food it's to itself variable. It's lean, it's inconsistent, it's definitely sometimes tough, and sometimes those strong flavors surprise people. And instead of forcing it into a narrow set of techniques, expand it a bit, open the aperture, give some of these other global cuisines a chance to give you a new set of tools to work with.
Yeah, I think like our favorite culinary voice, I assume, Justin, you and I, Anthony Bourdain, he talked about this a lot, and it really crystallized, like reading his books really crystallized my own viewpoints when it came to peasant food and how much, like I think I never wanted to become a chef because I thought it was all just fancy French cooking and maybe Italian, and I just didn't really want to get into that, and I was really drawn towards other cuisines and kind of the peasant cooking and the ways people took hard to deal with ingredients and made them absolutely delicious. They weren't given like the best ingredient ever and then you have to just grill it slightly and it's delicious with some salt. They actually had to like work to change it. And Bourdain really saw that clearly and talked about it and explored it and celebrated it. And I think the cuisines that he really gravitated towards are the ones we're talking about that offer so much, other techniques and flavors and everything that work really well with wild game, and it's really underappreciated in North American culture.
I think we definitely get into this conversation point, and I know this falls on kind of like a tenet that Bourdain followed of like taking the actual moment to enjoy the food. Like, how many people cruise through the drive-through, go to the grocery store, get a hot plate and sit and eat it in your car, or drive home eating it, or do whatever, like not taking the chance to actually physically stop and enjoying the food. And I think that's such a thing that's commonplace that I really firmly believe that Western culture has embedded in us, and a lot of this like eat for calorie sake, not for flavor and enjoyability. And I think peeling that back a bit, this kind of expands beyond the wild game space. A lot of these cuisines that you see where food is, a symphony, right? It's a symphony of flavors. It's a mix of all kinds of things coming together to create this really like masterful cuisine. And that exists across the globe and in all the different continents in various forms. But the key to that is people stop and they eat it and they celebrate it. And it's not just, hey, I got to get my 50 grams of protein today and I've got to make sure that I hit my 8,000 calories and all this other stuff, and all right, I'm eating and I'm moving on to something else. It's really like, it's a pause to like sit and enjoy it, to have food with someone else, to gather family around a meal, to celebrate those ingredients that are on the plate, whether they're farmed or gathered or hunted or fished. Like those things come together as like this big force multiplier of flavor. And I think it's really, really cool because in a lot of global cuisines, it's set aside as a moment of like, we have to eat. And even moments that come out of desperation or, a need of like, I eat what's available, food still becomes such a central staple of everything. And I think it's really cool when you start to approach that. And we talk a lot about celebrating wild game, but like, how much are we really celebrating it if the celebration doesn't continue all the way through the consumption?
I've been seeing a lot of these videos on Instagram recently. It's like younger Chinese people try to get their grandparents to say or their parents to say they love them, and they don't. They'll walk into the house and they say, "Have you eaten yet? Have you eaten any rice yet?" And that's what means I love you more than the actual I love you. But it's so tied with food.
Yeah,
and bringing that, the extra attention to your food, I think plays a role in all of this too. Like not just the actual techniques, but the approach to food that you see elsewhere in the world that we're kind of lost in North America. I think that all adds to, a massive element to how it tastes and how it's appreciated and how it's loved and everything.
The new LinkedIn Hiring Pro can't clone you, but it can streamline your hiring workflow. From posting jobs to shortlisting candidates to interviewing, LinkedIn Hiring Pro is the hiring partner you need, so you can focus on connecting with the right talent. In fact, small businesses report saving over 6 hours per week. So hire right the first time with LinkedIn Hiring Pro. Post a free job today at linkedin.com/quality.
It's baseball, but so much more. Go bananas for Banana Ball with ESPN on Disney+. The greatest show in sports.
Are you kidding me?
Is the phenomenon everyone's talking about.
The trick play to the plate.
Catch the Savannah Bananas and other fan-favorite teams all season long with select games streaming with ESPN on Disney+.
Let's go!
U.S. residents, 18+ only. Select Banana Ball games available to all Disney+ subscribers. Terms apply.
Been on this little kick the past couple weeks of like trying to save time in the evenings because we have like very busy schedules and stuff, and so we started like getting a bit of prepped food from the grocery store and pre-made meals and things like that. And after about a week and a half of it, I was like, man, I really miss cooking. As much effort goes into it because we don't just cook at my house, we cook. And it's kind of similar to that. So like there's tons of dirty dishes and you have to clean up, and like you may start cooking at 6 o'clock and you're wrapping up washing dishes at 9:30, 10. But with all that, like you can go and get great food, prepared, and you can have all your meal prep and all this stuff. But like, man, oh man, I missed for those few days. I was like, I need to go like sit down and like just cook a meal because I really missed like not cooking this week. So it's very interesting when you start to peel back the layers of the connectivity and how you can be like, I don't know how frequently people out there cook, how much wild game or fish or forageables they have available to them at any given moment. But I think that's sort of the theme of this, of like step outside the bounds of what you look at, try something a little different.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we can get into the techniques a little bit too to help people get into that. We can break down some of that. So like we've been kind of talking about specific cuisines. Maybe we can get more into techniques. It's actually more useful to think in terms of culinary systems, kind of, rather than like to get your raw ingredients where you want them to be, rather than maybe the full places they're coming from. So I've got a few examples of culinary dishes and systems that kind of solve the types of problems you might encounter with wild game and fish and edibles as well. And I think these are easier to gravitate to. So rather than thinking like, I've got to learn how to do Mexican cuisine, because that's a huge and possibly massive thing to even dip your toes into. I haven't even dipped my toes into yet, and all I do is think and write about food. But let's get into, say, like tacos. Tacos, approachable, universally beloved. They're great for, tougher cuts, mixed textures, offal. You want to cut things into small pieces, adding acid, fat, and texture. If you think of like a really good, true Mexican tacos, rather than just the old El Paso kiss, no shade on those either. I like those too. Those are great. Just the ground beef, whatever, or ground venison. Those are great too. But the kind of the true Mexican street tacos, they're taking like really interesting. They're taking tongue or heart or tripas or different things and tougher cuts, and they're braising and they're mixing and they're cutting small, and they kind of change the general makeup of the meat to fit the taco. And I find that's a really accessible and easy way to do that, and to kind of transform your more troublesome cuts of meats into something that's truly delicious. Another one we talked a lot about is stir fry, which is, coming from the Asian side of things. We're breaking things down by thinly slicing them and then cooking them very fast. And when you do this, you could even take something like shank, which is one of the toughest cuts in the animal, slice it super thin, cook it super fast, and it will still be tender enough to eat. And that's something we don't often do. Like those things typically get ground or braised. Something like, old Tom, like a wild turkey, that might be pretty damn tough. You can slice it thin. You can velvet, which we talked about before. It's a kind of a marination technique that softens the meat. It's great. Stir fry is great for uneven cuts, really lean meats. It's good for if you're like, say you're shaping some really nice roasts when you're butchering your animal and then you got the ends cut off. You can just slice that up into stir fry meat. It's great. Another kind of system we're talking about here, which is a whole crazy one that's spread across the world, is curry. That's where the sauce really carries the dish, and that's really good for tough cuts, old birds, tough birds, really strong flavors. So think if you have like a funky wild boar, a wild pig,
ruddy buck,
something like that, like a strong curry, like a vindaloo or these kind of stronger, like big flavors are great for that because they really can help cover up some of those unwanted flavors with something that's really delicious. And the same goes for tougher cuts. You can really break them down. Like I've done venison shank nahari, which is like kind of a Pakistani meat curry. And it's just so good. It just breaks it all down. It's so delicious. Curry is a great way to kind of make use of some of those other cuts that you might not be used. And also sort of for some bitter flavors, like bitterness really goes well with curry. So maybe some bitter leaves, bitter wild greens. Another one is like Caribbean jerk. And Caribbean jerk was actually specifically developed for tough and musky wild pigs. If you look at the history of Jamaica, which I recommend everyone do because it's very interesting. Escaped slaves lived in the interior and they caught wild pigs that were left by the Spanish years before, and they dug pits and they would make like a jerk marinade and then smoke it over pimento branches, and that's kind of where jerk came from. And barbecue also was influenced by this, and it was just for these wild pigs. So it's great. It's perfect. It has a lot of flavor penetration. It's great for tougher muscles and can mask unwanted flavors in your meats. One that is exploding across the world, but you haven't seen too much in Western culture yet, is hot pot. Hot pot is massive, like all over Asia. Anywhere there's the Asian diaspora, and it's delicious. It's kind of thin sliced communal cooking. It's super forgiving, super adaptable. It's great for roast cuts. Like if you're not always good, like when I'm doing butchering deer for a lot of people, I found there's a fair amount of people who don't want roasts. They're like, I don't want to cook a big old roast in a pot roast or whatever. But if you're not into that whole big piece of meat, hot pot's awesome. Just slice the roasts super thin, dip it in hot oil or like a broth mix, and just delicious. There's so many different, and that's just dipping your toes into the beginning of. There's systems all over the world that are made specifically to handle these issues that we find in wild game and fish and edibles.
And I think that's like the key, right? You don't have to learn everything. You just need to borrow the system. And there's lots of different techniques out there, and maybe you change the approach, the way you use the search engine on the internet. Maybe it's not hey, what recipe do I need for this? Instead it's what technique can I use for this? And start with a technique and then move forward.
There's actually one thing that I've been noticing that's kind of interesting right now, and it's a lot of these cuisines are showing up on social media like TikTok and Instagram. And what we're seeing is people really getting into this like Mexican and Indian and South Asian cooking. You see it in like birria, whatever, which is everywhere, and you see it in like, I don't know, just a lot of people are kind of pushing this. But a lot of time I'm noticing they're dealing with like pork belly and ribeye and Wagyu beef and all these really high-end, easy ingredients. And it makes for really delicious food, obviously. But, these people aren't really cooking very much. They're just throwing like a top, awesome, incredible, easy-to-cook ingredient, adding some of the, the spices or techniques and going for it. And I think that's really kind of missing the point. A lot of these cuisines are actually built around like tough chickens and goats and water buffaloes and organ meat and stuff. So if anything, wild game is actually closer to the original intent than what you're seeing online. And I think that's important to note as well, that these systems developed in these countries were actually developed for tougher cuts and gamier in quotes meat and all these different things more than just like a tender ass ribeye, which anyone can cook. You know, a monkey could cook a ribeye and make it taste good even if they overcooked it. So I find that, you know, although that stuff is tasty, these systems are actually created more for stuff like wild game, and I think you're better off doing it like that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's kind of like missing the point.
Right?
Yeah. There's this whole element of technique and flavor that's already built, and we're trying to reinvent it by hitting the easy button. Yeah. And it's like you're kind of experiencing it-ish, but not in its true format. And I don't know, we could dive down the rabbit hole of like authenticity or things like that. But I think for, you know, the sake of the conversation, like the main point we're trying to get here, I think, is that there's a lot more out there that is probably easier to do, and things are designed specifically for wild game that aren't often labeled wild game.
Definitely.
And I don't know, I kind of reflect on my own, and you know, my goal, like I mentioned earlier, is to kind of like push the limits, right? I want to see where we can go in the space. I want to cook outside the lines. If you saw a recent like social media post, like I think there's something to be said there. There's a lot of flavor available, and you know, I'm personally like I'm kind of over some of the basics. Like I've been doing it long enough. I've been doing it on repetition. Like I need a new space to kind of swim and dwell. And you know, we're closing out the last few chapters of like our Cooking by Cut book, literally, as we come through like the design and editing phase. And I'm looking at that. I'm really proud of what we've done there, because we've brought a lot of global cuisines into the conversation. But I'm also like, all right, what are we missing? You know, and just the other day, like if you scroll back last week or the week before, depending on when this comes out, I made like a raw venison kitfo, which is a European like raw ground meat, or it's not ground, it's minced, like chopped up with a knife. I made that like something completely outside, and I will tell you the comments on that across social media was all over the place. Some people were like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. And some people were like, oh my gosh, I could never, like it's raw, yada, yada, yada. And it's crazy because it's not actually raw. It's like slightly cooked. There's lots of things going on, but also too, like, there's a lot more food that's living in that space. And I think that's what we're talking about, of like, we've narrowed our scope to what you could call sort of like, I don't know, European influenced American cuisine. And that tends to what we label wild food as. And there's so much more.
So much more.
So there's a tendency to think of wild food as something that like fits into a very specific box. But the more you look at it, the more you realize that a lot of the answers are already out there in cuisines that were built around similar challenges. So maybe it's not about reinventing wild cooking. Maybe it's about looking a little wider, trying something different, and seeing what works. So as you ponder this, your drive home or to work, or running down a pathway, or sitting in a blind somewhere, or fishing, or butchering, or cleaning your garage, or mopping your floors, I don't know what you do while you listen to us. Maybe you don't do anything. But think about this. Think through, like, what are some of the things you want to do? Where are some of the places you want to go? And maybe not physically go there, but go there on the plate. And think about how wild game can play really well to that. And push the limits. See what's new. Share with us what's new. And let's have a big conversation about it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Have a good night.